with Guido Fawkes, as he calls himself, doing his annual appearance. Not in fact Guido at all, but Guy, wasn't it, Mr. Fawkes?
John Johnson, Guy Fawkes, Guido Fawkes, depending on who I'm speaking to, of course.
You had a mixed press over the years. Traditionally, you've been reviled as a traitor and somebody who was out to kill the king and the royal and all the aristos. But now, blowing up Parliament seems not such a bad idea. How do you think about the current view of it?
In this day and age, in the 21st century, when you pick up a newspaper, when you watch the news, there are barely any people in this country that wouldn't rejoice at the sight of Parliament being blown up. Not just this Parliament, but parliaments across the world.
Indeed, across the world there have been a lot of parliaments recently, Middle East especially, being virtually blown up, and some of them have actually been blown up, and as we sit here now in Syria, they are attempting to blow up a parliament. So you were ahead of the game in many regards.
In many ways too. And those today are probably still ahead of the game. It is the political classes that are the ones that are lagging behind and aren't realising the true force of people power, and that the sovereignty lies with the people rather than they themselves.
In your time you were executed in 1605, but then in your context, what's your understanding of what was going on then? What was really happening?
It was a time of political turmoil. The Queen of England had just died without an heir. She had herself recently transitioned from her father being a Catholic country into a Protestant country, breaking away the link with Rome, where the Pope wielded much political influence and was seen by ordinary Catholics as being above the king. And of course the monarch doesn't want anybody to be above him. Really, not even God. They would rather be seen by their subjects as being the supreme commander, so that their subjects are more subservient to them.
They were pretty ferocious people then. Henry VIII, we're told, had executed 70,000 people, with obviously a very small population in Britain then, but 70,000 people lived. He used to like to boil people in oil. These are the people we regard today as sort of something to be admired. Was that the view then? How did people view their monarchs then?
They were appointed by the grace of God, and opposing the grace of God is, of course, something that you really don't want to be opposing, simply for there is no higher power than God. And when you challenge that paradigm, you're assumed to be a heretic. You're assumed to be blasphemous, and of course, blasphemy and heresy at the time was punishable by death. It was simply a way of controlling people.
You were part of a small group, only a few dozen of you actually, but took up in arms, and obviously the gunpowder plot, and you were caught with the match in your hand apparently. But was there a much wider movement out there?
There were people that had tried to execute the king or begin uprisings on multiple occasions, going back 1568, there were uprisings against Queen Elizabeth. Many years after that happened, and of course the Spanish tried intervening in 1588, and even after 1605, people have tried to get rid of their rulers, be them elected rulers, be them kings and queens, be them dictators. People have always and will always try to get rid of their leaders through one way or another.
The plot and intrigue was quite close to the Queen herself during her reign, and it was obviously followers of James, people in the court, even when James came on the throne in 1603. Are we a bit misled by the official historical account of the context in which kings and queens have ruled?
Of course. The people are the ones that are always meant to be choosing their leaders, and this historically hasn't been the case. Kings and queens have led some of the most bloody regimes throughout all history. Henry VIII executed tens of thousands of people. He wasn't the first king to do that, he wasn't the last king to do that, and now today presidents and prime ministers still execute hundreds of thousands of people via acts of war or acts of non-intervention in some cases too. Kings and queens and presidents and prime ministers will always be those that.
It's remarkable that not many years after you were executed, there was another civil war in England, of quite a very large civil war, where the king did lose his head. The king's head was chopped off. Charles I had his head chopped off. And there were some of the families which were supporting your gunpowder plot were involved in that as well. Do you think this is an inevitable consequence of having a royalist system?
Absolutely. There is no accountability in a royalist system whatsoever. It's impossible to remove a monarch without putting a gun to their head or by physically removing that head. It's a system that is meant to go down. It's a hierarchy going down the line through the firstborn, which is really no system when you think about it, because if you were trying to have a tooth taken out and you're delivered the anaesthetic by your dentist, and your dentist suddenly says, "Oh, I'm not a dentist, but my dad was a good dentist," you wouldn't accept it, but in those days it was accepted by the leaders for some bizarre reason.
You're in Jersey on part of your travels around the British Isles over the next week or so. No doubt there'll be bonfires burning your body here. What do you think about that little outpost like Jersey should be following in this tradition?
It's very strange, Jersey's history, when you think about it, and its relationship to the kings and queens of England previously. The people are given one version of history, for example, that of Sir Walter Raleigh, who built Elizabeth Castle and was governor of Jersey, and is portrayed as someone who who was